Today, Raul and I are going to discuss consultants. To be honest, I am not a big fan of consultants myself, but I do believe with the rise of AI and employee efficiency, more and more companies will outsource deeply specialized and high expertise tasks to consultants, advisors, and coaches. But the big problem remains, how do you spot the good ones from the bad? And that's exactly what Raul and I are going to talk about today. Enjoy.
If LeBron James and Tiger Woods and Cristiano Ronaldo are better with a coach than without, you're probably too.
You will have then operators that, know a bunch of things really well, but have to stay broad to a large degree. And then once in a while, there will be a thing that requires deep understanding of a single issue. It doesn't make sense to hire that person in full time.
Stay away from the hammer people. They will have very clear, very repeatable answers that are just not necessarily addressing the problem. And most of all, very simplistic answers to quite complex problems.
I think consulting is a lot of selling of ideas, selling of views, selling of, change and stuff, but it is an actual skill in itself. Mikkel and I, we always talked about kids. You don't have those yet. That's why we're talking about Magic the Gathering and all of that stuff. But for everyone else, thinking like, hey, what's going on with Tony's kids? Well, I have an update for you. No, there's not going to be one more. We're going to keep it at 2. But my smallest one today is graduating daycare. He's now going from, in Danish you call it Vuggestue. In German it's like Kinderkrippe. You're going from this first thing where you spend your first 3 years. He's now graduating to kindergarten. So there's a kid's life update for you all. But yeah, Raul, maybe you enlighten us on when is it you're planning to actually multiply? Kind of what's your plan for that?
Is that something you can plan so simply? I don't know if you planned it.
No,
we didn't. There's a couple elements that need to be in place, I guess, like a good process. Let's call it not the revenue engine, but the kid-making engine. There's some pieces missing.
How often is your mom asking you about this?
So she's learned not to anymore. I would say that's after a while you kind of get it. But I don't even know if I want kids, to be honest. It really depends on the situation. I've been telling her since I was 12, 13 years old, I don't want any.
Yeah.
Plus, I got you, so I get enough company.
Yeah, there you
I have
go.
to deal with you every day.
Okay, well, there we go. What other things are people dealing with that we want to talk about today, Raul?
We've actually grazed the edges of this sometimes, but today is another time when we thought it would be a good idea to talk about consultants / advisors / coaches. And we thought it would be kind of a sweet spot to give our thoughts on when you're trying to work with these, what are the things you should be looking out for? What are red flags, as in this is what you're trying to avoid? When you see that, run away. And what are green flags, as in this is what you actually like to see, or what you'd like to question and then see what happens. Is it the right answer there? And so obviously this is because working with consultants can be hugely beneficial. There is a point to working with them. But and at all stages, by the way, they can help you get there faster. They can help you reduce your learning time, and you can genuinely be better off working with them.
What do you say to people, which was basically me 10 years ago, very much full of myself? Not that has changed, but basically thinking and saying, I don't need those freaking consultants. They just come in, they cost a lot of money. They really just organize a meeting or two, send me a slide deck. All of that stuff is useless.
Yeah. Do you what's your sport, by the way? I don't think we've ever talked about this. Mine is basketball. You like basketball, football? What's your thing?
I don't have one. Bad way to try and build the coach example. I can totally see where you're going with this. Let's just say I'm playing football. Let's just for the sake of it.
Yeah. You think Cristiano Ronaldo has a coach?
Yeah,
he's got like 20 probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You think LeBron James, I guess you know who that is. You think LeBron James has a coach?
The bigger question is, do you think they have a management consultant?
That for sure. They probably have financial advisors and everything too,
probably
by the way.
Probably too.
The thing here is, I don't think, by the way, the lines between coach and advisor and consultant are that clear, to be honest. If those people at these levels of the game, and that's just not just true for sports, but for anything, can benefit from having additional people help them out, then you can too, Mr. Little Series A startup taking themselves very seriously, to be quite honest there. Like if LeBron James and Tiger Woods and Cristiano Ronaldo are better with a coach than without, you're probably too. And the same is probably true for a consultant. This is all obviously very high level, but I think what matters is having a good one and one that can actually help you there. And this is where a lot of people have actually been stung by the black sheep, people who claim they're really good or that have good intentions but just can't follow up.
Before we kind of move on to that part, which is actually really kind of the insightful part, I want to say, of the session here, I do have a feeling though that this whole consulting relationship with organizations is going to change in the future. I think organizations are going to become leaner and smaller and more efficient, right? We talked about AI and automations and all of that stuff. We now saw the first solo founder build a company and sell it for $80 million in like 6 months. We are now seeing kind of a team of 3 people getting to $1 million and beyond and wanting to go to 30 million. We had Amash on the podcast. And we will see more and more of those examples, right? And I think what's the flip side of that is that while you start automating all the menial tasks away, like all the boring stuff, you will have then operators that know a bunch of things really well, but have to stay broad to a large degree. And then once in a while, there will be a thing that requires depth, that requires deep understanding of a single issue. It doesn't make sense to hire that person in full time, right? You wouldn't go like, oh, we're 3 people, let's hire a CMO to do the branding stuff. Like that wouldn't make any sense. Instead, I think people will start more and more to be like, okay, I have this one very specific challenge. None of us can really kind of solve this. This is not an AI challenge or automation challenge either. I think this is we need to get someone externally and helping us with that challenge. And I think that kind of approach, I think that's gonna increase in the next couple of years.
So this is another one where I think the sports analogy actually comes in, and this is not where I wanted to go. But if this continues and if this propels itself forward, think about what athletes really do. They don't just have coaches and consultants and advisors and all that. They also have absolute specialists at some very narrow things that they work with. So Kobe Bryant, who recently passed away a couple of years ago, was one of the first ones, for example, when he had knee problems. He was traveling to this one doctor in Germany, actually Germany, by the way, who offered a very specific niche thing and treatment for his knee that he wasn't able to get anywhere else. And he paid royal money for that and also was rewarded with extending his career quite a bit. So when you're kind of at the leverage where your knee is making you hundreds of millions of dollars, and I don't think that's so different from when you're at the leverage from when your funnel is making you hundreds of millions probably. You want the absolute best you can get. What do a lot of startups do, even early on when there is high leverage? They get Mr. Joe Schmo intern and want to pay them $1,000 a month to do all of it at once. Yeah.
I wonder if there's, and maybe you're going to go into this, but I wonder if there's some kind of because I can see that. I've been... as an operator and as a founder, trying always to be super scrappy about things, right? Kind of trying to be cheap about this. And I think a lot of people are stuck in this like, oh, how can I know that person is worth what they're saying and so forth, right? But you know what? Instead of having this wandering, let's just kind of go into the couple of things that we kind of put together where we're seeing like, hey, those are issues. Those are, let's just say, red flags, right? Kind of, I think we have like a red flag or, very much amber moving towards red kind of flags here. So what's the first one, Raul?
I will preface this by saying what comes before all of this is understanding exactly what your high leverage points are, as I was just talking about. And I think a lot of the time, the confusion or the frustration, maybe the insecurity of working with advisors is not knowing that this is exactly the thing that is actually high leverage for your company right now. And that it will produce that ROI if solved correctly. Because if you know that, then the question is not necessarily one of, oh, should we pay for this? Should we pay for that? It would be very clear what is worth taking money in your hands for. So even if you were scrappy, there is no point in being scrappy as a virtue. You need to know where to be scrappy and where to expand.
I'm wondering if everyone knows these things. So, I mean, if I'm LeBron James and my knee hurts, I'm like, my knee hurts. That's the pain point. That's the problem. I need someone that makes knees unhurt, basically, right? I'm sometimes wondering, kind of in a complex system like go-to-market, and maybe it's a little bit less complex in the beginning, but certainly it's later on. I almost wonder if people are diagnosing things correctly. Like, oh, we have a pipeline problem, but actually, no, maybe you have a messaging problem because that's leading to your pipeline problem and so forth, right? I think there's a skill, and I'm not saying that needs to be consultant either, but I think there's a skill and a difficulty in even diagnosing correctly to then get the right consultants or the right people in to fix these things, right? There's a little bit of a GP to specialist kind of analogy here potentially.
Yeah.
But I think that's super interesting too.
And the right people can also help you figure out the high pressure points and high leverage points for your company, just like the GP you just mentioned, right? Again, the question is, how do you know who's the right one for you? Let's kick things off here with the first red flag that we're looking for. So we've called it before, and that's the name I've termed the hammer people. So stay away from the hammer people. What's a hammer person? A hammer person is someone to whom everything is a nail, because that's what they have is a hammer. And how does it translate to you as a venture, as a startup? Well, these are the people that for whatever problem you have in go-to-market, they have one or two answers that they've done at the previous company that they worked at. Your funnel needs to be reworked. You need sales training. You don't have enough leads? Sales training. People don't enter data into the Salesforce system. You need sales training, my man. And so on and so forth, right? And they will package it nicely. And if they're smart and a little bit eloquent, then they will have better ways of delivering than I just did it. But essentially, they will have very clear, very repeatable answers to always the same problems that are just not necessarily addressing the problem. And most of all, very simplistic answers to quite complex problems.
I gotta say, right, kind of, I'm this one team that I'm advising, I recently advised them to do more outbound. and while we were working through the issue, and I was like, oh shit, I think they need to do more outbound. I was at the same time also like, Toni, come on. Is this your hammer and you're just seeing nails everywhere? Everything needs to be outbound. But no, I mean, I challenged myself kind of, hey, is this really the right answer? And kind of in their case, it actually works perfectly. Happy they've been doing this. But I think as a person doing some of the advising, you also just need to be aware where your own bias, where your own comfort zone is, because you will always try and go back to that comfort zone, right? And I think that's the normal tendency. And not necessarily because they they want to be evil or something like this, want to mislead you or something like this, but they just are heavy in this area, and then that's why kind of that might happen. But how do you green flag this role? Kind of how do you get out of the how do you help people to spot that their consultant is a hammer person?
So let's take your example right here for the green flag part. You're someone who personally is, I would not call a hammer person because of obviously the variety of things you've seen, but also your approach of fundamentals and first principles and understanding things, I would say, on a physical level, which typically would lead you to, when you were giving that advice of outbound, this is your solution, I would assume, first of all, you just said it, you've questioned yourself, is this really the right thing? But you've probably also considered more than one option, right? You didn't get there and said outbound in itself. And even when you said outbound, then what followed after was probably giving justice to the complexity of the problem. So it was not just outbound in itself. Is that true? How did you give that actual answer?
The thing was actually that realizing that the recipient of the outbound was someone in an area, in a region, I don't want to be too specific here, but in a region and in a job function where actually you and I believe that outbound still works. Basically kind of having these, features of being in Germany, outbound in Germany still works, like the phone works, right? Having the features of being in a very niche position within an enterprise that hasn't been completely spammed yet. And, a bunch of people that aren't spending their life on LinkedIn and seeing all the tactics and building all of those defense mechanisms, basically. Since it kind of ticked those boxes for me, I was like, this could totally work. Like, this could absolutely work. And yes, again, the real question though is like, how could my client figure out that I'm not a hammer person? That's actually the real question here for everyone listening, right?
So what you just did, what would we call that? The last couple of sentences that you said which was basically the justification of why you thought outbound was a good answer. You could probably call that an analysis or a dissection of the problem. Right? So what you're looking for, the green flags you want is a proper dissection and analysis of the problem that starts from a non-biased standpoint, if possible, and considers a variety of solutions, so that's the second point, and a variety of approaches. And first principle thinking, meaning I'm trying to understand the problem from the roots, understanding really what pushes the needle and what moves the needle and what doesn't, and goes from really the business needs at the end of the day. Now, that doesn't mean that someone is not a hammer person, but it's a strong indicator. First of all, typically because hammer people are not that sophisticated, so they wouldn't be able to properly analyze and dissect the problem, since business problems can be typically quite difficult. And even if they are, with a little bit of pinpointing here and there, you can probably figure out their biases and figure out that they're actually always going towards the same direction. So the one thing you should be looking out for here is, I could personally present you an analysis that goes into always exactly the same end result that I want to get to from the beginning. I could do that. I choose not to. But if you were to question me a bit more, it would be more difficult. And if you were to engage in an actual conversation about that, it would be even more difficult for me to get to exactly where I wanted to go while still giving a coherent answer.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next one.
And I think this is quite controversial, as has the first one already been a little bit maybe. The red flag would be someone lacking actual consulting experience, right? And I don't mean experience in itself, right? That's a wonderful thing. So someone has been 10 years, twice 5 years CRO at some SaaS company, so that could be a great thing. Could also be terrible for you, by the way, but let's assume it is good. That does not mean they're a good consultant. So first of all, consulting is a skill set of its own. Right? I have been working at this for 10 to 12 years, and it took me a while to really figure out how to actually be good at this. And I would say I'm good at this right now, but I definitely wasn't in the first year or two. And I definitely wasn't just because I had worked on a problem before. It is not the same to have solved the problem than to help someone else solve the same problem. And first of all, most problems you're going to face as a consultant are not exactly the same as you've solved them yourself. So I think that there is quite an overvaluing of people who've done it actually. And while that is helpful, an undervaluing of people who are then able to translate that to results for you, because that's what you really care about.
Yeah.
The fact that you're looking at CV is just a proxy.
What I sometimes call is consulting is an actual skill, right? Kind of selling is a skill, coding is a skill, leadership is a skill. Consulting in itself is an actual skill of, a mix of a few of those things that I just mentioned. Like, I think consulting is a lot of selling, actually, selling of ideas, selling of views, selling of, change and stuff. But it is an actual skill in itself. So what is, if you were to kind of try and help someone to pinpoint whether or not someone has that skill in itself, right? It could be, yes, they have been a consultant with BCG for 10 years. They probably have that skill now. But like, if they don't, what proxies would you use to figure out if someone has that capability?
Every consultant skill set can really be different. So I would say that there is not one exact thing you'd be looking for, but it always comes back to solving the same problems. So what you would like to do is when you're interviewing for that consultant position, or when you're talking to someone who could be helping you that way, look at the way they go through problems. So as I talked before, it is about the analysis, dissection of problems, but it's also about the clarity and the way of communicating those problems. So are they able to quickly absorb what matters in your business, to ask the right questions? Do you feel like they're getting to what really matters, or do you feel like they're only getting away? Now, sometimes maybe they're getting away a little bit because they actually have a goal later in mind, but if you look at the whole session, did you actually talk about what mattered in the end? Did you have a feel that they grasped what mattered for that business? And did they do so in a small amount of speed, so in a short amount of time? So this is one of the skill sets of being a consultant, is you might be working, so me personally, I'm working with 8 to 10 companies right now. I have to onboard myself super fast. I have to ask the right questions so that I know how to work with that company after a day or two, where maybe if I were an employee, I would have a month or two. So that's also maybe something you're looking for. Do they have a short time to understanding and to kind of be at least 80%, 80-20 onboarded? But then there's maybe some more concrete things here. So are they able to give clear answers and move ways forward? Are they able to take unstructured thoughts and implicit thoughts and put them into an explicit way? So, for example, hey, Toni, based on what you just told me about, it seems like these are the three main things, right? I'm not sure what we do about number three. How about we just start working on the first two ones, right? Have you tried this? Have you tried the other? Okay, why not? Why? And so it's kind of like a decision tree that I'm discussing together with you. And I do that to arrive at clear recommendations, clear steps forward, so I have an idea of how to actually proceed here, and a strong execution plan. So if they're able to communicate those things, it's very likely that that's already a little bit of a consulting skill set, right?
I actually think it's a little bit, again, some of this stuff is changing. I think the way consultants will engage with companies is going to change, and speed to value, just like in a product business, this being a service business, super important, right? And you just mentioned kind of the time it takes for you to get onboarded. It's really important to kind of keep this super short, because otherwise it will just reflect poorly on the, whatever value you kind of add afterwards, right? It's kind of interesting how those two concepts of selling a product, selling a service, how they're kind of merging. Maybe they have been the same all the time, but it's maybe just making click in my head that the way we evaluate those things is actually in very much the same way. But let's not linger too much on my stream of consciousness here. What's the next one I like a lot, by the way, which is really about those consultants, they don't say no, they keep saying yes, kind of the yes-sayer consultants, and that's a bad thing. Why?
To an extent. It depends really on the person and also the personality, but you're also getting a consultant to tell you where you're wrong. And that should start with any good consultant, actually, especially for a founder or a CEO, with even the most basic of assumptions, right? I'm not saying they should question everything and fight you on everything, because obviously you should know more about your company, and you do. But they should be kind of pointing you in certain directions and teasing you here a little bit here and there. It's like, are you sure that outbound is really your problem? Are you sure you've tried correctly? Hey, maybe you threw the towel too fast in the UK. Like, what about this? What about that? Right? So if they just take things for granted along the way, and then also take very easily things for granted as to the recommendations and the action plans and what should be done, that's not a good sign. So a good conversation with a consultant, especially early on, right? So we're not talking maybe after the third or fourth time you've met, should be a little bit of a struggle. And it should be where maybe they're challenging you a little bit on your assumptions and on, is this really what should be done? Maybe this is not actually your problem. Have you looked at it that way? Have you looked at it this way, right? So kind of the shaping era of the relationship, where it's really about discussing the job to be done and nailing down what is there to be achieved and how to do that, that should be a little bit of a fight. If they're not pushing back, and if they're not really also asserting themselves a little bit and their ideas, that's probably not a good sign. Now, you can still agree at something later on, so it doesn't mean that they have to be impossible to work with, but it shouldn't be that easy.
I'm just wondering, because sometimes, questioning too much. I mean, I kind of even see this employees working, for me, right? Kind of, it sometimes feels a little bit like, doubters and like, besserwissers and that kind of stuff. I think it's a fine line. I'm just going to say it out loud, right? I think it's a fine line. And I think it's also in some point, at least kind of this is the employee relationship, almost a team member relationship. It's like, you can raise your hand once, you can raise your hand twice, but after the third time saying, no, we're going in this direction, then I also kind of don't want to hear about it anymore. And I think that extends a little bit also to consultants to a degree, right? At some point, the consultant is going to be like, well, if you want to run off the cliff, you got to do that, my friend.
Yes. And that's what they might do. So a good consultant might. So first of all, a consultant is not your employee, right? So it is not the same kind of relationship. I would go mad if my employees would be doing what I do every single day with kind of the consultant clients I have. But then again, I'm not an employee, and I'm not looking to be one for those cases, right? So they specifically also want me to do that. The question is, how do I do that? And maybe do I find a way where it's like a productive kind of discussion? And luckily, a lot of times I find a way, right? But if someone goes out there and pays top dollar for a consultant and someone who really has experience, they don't just expect them really, and you also shouldn't expecting them to just nod ahead and be like, yes, boss, yes, boss, yes, boss, right? These are typically the order takers, not necessarily the people who have an idea of what really matters and what shouldn't, right?
Let's talk about price next, actually. I don't know. Is there too cheap? Is it too expensive? Kind of how does that actually work?
So I'll throw that question back actually, because basically when we pre-discussed this, we're talking about, well, a bad consultant, a red flag to look out for is if they're too cheap. Now, you as currently a consultant and CEO, what are your thoughts on this? Like, are you looking for just the cheapest person possible, or is price not an issue with this kind of consulting thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's what I struggle with in the whole consulting kind of realm, and that's why also, I don't actually have some of those skills. It's very intangible value you're selling to a degree, right? Kind of, I really enjoy selling a product, like here's what it is, try it out, test it out. Here, that's what I'm going to do for you. Consultant is kind of, yes, it can do everything, but can it really, right? So that's why it's really difficult, I think, setting a price. It's sometimes like a confidence game more than anything else, I feel like, which I just don't enjoy necessarily as a way to kind of think about it. But I mean, theoretically thinking, right? So I had this, for example, with recruiters, right? In the beginning, external recruiters, I was like, you know what? Let's add some recruiters to get us SDRs. That was the biggest bottleneck. And basically, we had an incentive to try and, get them to do the work for us the cheapest way possible, because, that saves us money, reduces my CAC, blah, 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 blah. And then after a while, it dawns on me that the way those recruiters are working is, okay, which of my clients is paying me the most? It's okay, this client. With my, the first place I'm going to go with any new talent is going to go to that client. When that client says no, I'm going to go to that client. When that client says no, I'm going to go to that client. The problem is you don't want to be at the bottom of that list, right? Kind of, you don't want to be the last client they go to, because all the good talents basically kind of have been taken then at that point already, right? And I'm not sure how it translates completely to the consultant thing that we're discussing right now, but at least there's a piece to it here where I'm thinking it translates over, doesn't it?
This is not necessarily how my brain works, so this might not be kind of a self-serving thing, but it doesn't have to be. Talking to people who do consulting, advisory, coaching, they will prioritize their time, and they have to, because that is such a different job when they're like a freelance consultant or they have a management consultancy. They have to go by what pays, obviously, and they have to kind of achieve a certain amount of money, right? And maybe you could work together with them for less money. That would also mean that maybe you're number 6 on their poll of projects that they're working with. And it can also mean that they can only give you 2-3 hours a week. I think there's this kind of trope that consultants are always overcharging. That is not true. Like, people really don't see a lot of times the thought and the work that goes behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's true.
And if I only have 40, 50, 60 hours, how many hours I work a week, and I have 10 ventures or 5 ventures I work with, I will have to kind of divide my attention between those companies, right? And that is also a little bit of an indicator. Now, I think it's ethically and also morally important to really also be transparent, like who you're working with, how many, and also tell someone if you can take really them on and give them the full attention. But the money you pay them also directly translates to the attention that they give you. Naturally, it would be the same for you if you were to do it that way, right? You're going to give your focus to where it matters most. And the thing is, if you want me to solve a problem for you, there's different intensities of how I can help you do that, right? And obviously price is one of the ways that dictates that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, really, the cheap versus expensive, whatever that means in your area, can be really different. Like, there is no price that is a lot or that is little. Like, I've known consultants who take $50 an hour. I've known consultants who take $1,000 an hour, and they're probably not even expensive. It depends on the area of expertise too. But when you have multiple options, price should really not be the most important indicator, especially when you really understand the ROI of what you're trying to achieve. And someone can propose you a great plan or convince you that they're the person to achieve that. That's really what should matter. And a couple things first before price. Now, I'm not saying pay out of your ass for everything. That would be dumb, right? That would not be a good advice either way here. But it should be a total package there. Maybe one more thing about very clear, transparent green flags to look for, right? So how can you see these things? Are they very transparent with pricing? I talked about that. Is the pricing kind of shaped to where you can work with them for a longer time? So typically, the longer you work with someone, the more clear it will be, are they good or not at what they're doing? And then also, are they willing to discuss maybe some kind of variable component? This is a very strong and clear indicator. Not every project lends itself to that, but at least in the world we're in, the world even you as a listener are in, I would venture that 70-80% of consulting projects you do could have some kind of variable component to the pay. And if they're open to that, that's already a good sign.
And I guess it does lead us almost kind of to the last bullet here, which is really about the ability for them to help you execute stuff, right?
What matters here, and I said this in the beginning, is it is not the same skill set, and it's also not the same to do something on your own or help someone do that thing and achieve that outcome that they're looking for. These are different things. Again, sports example. You don't necessarily have to be the best player to be the best coach, right? And some people are great at both, and typically the experience as a player lends itself to also being a better coach. So these are all factors. But what ultimately matters is you want someone to help you achieve your goal. Now, that could be because you hire them in a fractional position and you actually want them to do it. But it could also be that, by the way, but that is also more expensive. So that's one of the reasons to not take everything as a fractional CRO, CMO, what have you. Or you're saying, well, the way that this works out, I can see them just helping us with a retainer of 5 hours a week, touching some things here and there, and giving very, very good advice and analyses. The question is, like, is that really moving the needle? Analyses and recommendations, probably not. So what you're looking for here is, do they have an idea of how to actually execute? And this, I think, out of all the things we've talked about, is the rarest. So there's a bunch of people who by now, and this didn't used to be the case 6-7 years ago, who by now could tell you very eloquently about the bow tie, and they could tell you very well about PLG, and they could also tell you how to run an AI-driven sales motion, and all these things. The question then is, out of these people, how many actually have a skill set that could help me achieve that outcome? And that takes more than just putting up nice slides. That takes more than just knowing the what to do. It's about the execution skills, and it's about the enablement. It's about strong stakeholder management, clear communication, project management, if you want to call it that way, the boring stuff, but that is the stuff that gets things done. So when someone tells you, hey, you should be doing the bow tie, that's nice and all. What matters is when they're like, okay, and this is how we're going to do it, right? First of all, we're going to do this, then we're going to do the other. If that goes wrong, we might pivot to C or D. We're going to have to talk to these and these people once a week. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to focus on these and two, three things that we measure. We're going to be in budget, time, and scope. The project's going to be this long, right? This is what matters, and then also gets the result, really. And in addition to that, in the end, they're looking to also leave you better off than they found you. So they're looking for a way to enable you so that when they're done with the thing that they're building, you're at a higher level than you were before.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's also a difference then there between, being a consultant, a coach, an advisor. I feel like those three things, they sound sometimes like the same, but there are differences, at least in the depth of execution help that they that they should provide, right? And I think people out there should be, let's just say you do have an advisor, which I don't think is necessarily a bad idea, but like you should be thinking about, do you want this person even to execute stuff? Or do you want my consultant only to advise, right? Kind of, there should be differences in, what kind of skill sets you're looking for and kind of how that specific resource fits into the problem that you're having, right? Because not every problem lends itself for someone externally to execute it for you, right? There's some that totally do, but it's not always the same thing. Raul, we could go on here for quite a bit. Yeah. I was kind of trying to keep this super compact for our listeners here. And And I think maybe we kind of stop it here. Like we talked about a bunch of different things, like should you be doing, consulting services, should be kind of buying them in general. Like I am still not 1,000% of like a yes or no on this, but what I do believe is this is going to change going forward. And then I think we gave some really tangible pieces of advice for people to, look out for, to make sure that the person that they're engaging with, which might be magical, might have some, pros and cons to it, which doesn't necessarily need to lead people to reject someone, but just to kind of be aware of, how to manage that resource and get it to the best possible outcome.
And to sum that up really quickly, the 5 points, right? So try to stay away from the hammer people, right? Everything is a nail to a hammer person. That's not a good consultant. Look for people who have actual consulting experience, not experience as a practitioner only, but experience helping someone achieve those goals. Look for people who say no to you, right, in a constructive way and help you also shape the problem in itself. Look for people who are not necessarily cheap, but transparent about pricing and also will give you the full attention, right? Not necessarily choose the cheapest one, but choose the one that has the best package. And look for people who have an idea and maybe even a track record of actually executing rather than just talking about things. Especially for startups, that's not really the thing you're looking for. You want someone who can execute and enable you to be at a better point after the project than you were before.
Raul, thank you so much. And I hope this was helpful for everyone. If you think so, and if you're thinking about adding consultants, maybe send this podcast to a couple of your friends that are evaluating that too. And then otherwise, have a really good rest of the day. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Next week, I'm talking with Chris Tottman. He is a general partner of Notion VC, and he has been the co-founder and CCO of Message Labs, which he and the team sold to Semantic for $700 million, a little bit more than a decade ago. We're talking about why taking venture capital money has quite some downsides attached. And number 2, why your team probably needs a VP of product market fit. If you don't want to miss that conversation, hit that subscribe button and see you next week.
There's this kind of what we call this kind of delusional force field that we have, that we believe what we believe. And it's important that we need to believe what we believe in order to lean forward and go in, as the founder is taking extraordinary risk. But the reality is, from a VC, so staying on the venture track, which is growth driven. Let's say it's 1% of all of the VC deals that get done. So let's say there's 100% of companies, not all 100% are pitching for VC type money or trading their equity for working capital. But let's say 10% of those that are pitching get VC money. But there's only going to be a tenth of those, 1%, that actually stay, broadly speaking, on the venture case.